That's true that after school resumed almost 3 weeks ago, we're interested to know what's the current status of this pandemic in the schools, particularly because we didn't test the students before they go to school because we couldn't, there are too many, and because we needed to know the trend of the epidemic generally in the country. So we tested over 3,400 students countrywide in about 70 schools in all districts, in primary schools, secondary schools, and universities. So far, we've out of 70 schools tested, we've seen at least one positive case in 7 schools only, and all these 7 schools are located in areas close, actually nearby refugee camps where we had actually identified clusters of infections previously. So it wasn't a surprise to us as far as we knew that these are hotspots, these are areas that we could find these cases. And it doesn't mean that those schools where we tested negative, we didn't find any positive case. There's no COVID because this was a random testing. So the key message for us is how can we continue to protect schools? And even if there is a positive case in the school, how do we make sure it doesn't infect others? So in our statistics, secondary schools were mostly affected. And for me, it goes up to how these schools are organized. They stay at school, they have dormitories, they have restaurants, they eat together. So in most of the cases, these are high-risk areas, and that these where we need to emphasize more on use of masks, social distance, and make sure, even if they are in same dormitories, they don't close to each other or just share staffs and other materials that they have in schools. So primary schools and universities seems to have very low transmission from our statistics, close to 0.5%. And to me, this means a lot in terms of where the risks of getting infections are higher. So it's a good finding. It tells us that the transmission is low. There's no huge infection in schools so far, and we can still maintain these low transmissions moving forward. School continued. If there's a positive in a school, it doesn't mean you close it. It means that you take more measures to make sure it doesn't spread. And if there's a negative case in the school, it doesn't mean you relax, because you could have cases, even one case could infect the entire school if proper measures are not taken.
Right, and just this weekend, another batch of students returned to school, which means that the number of students in schools is going to increase. What are the measures to prevent even further cases that might spread in schools, mostly secondary schools, as you said, they were mostly infected?
So all places where people are gathering together in mass, in higher numbers, to me, already a high-risk area. Schools, markets, churches, prisons, refugee camps, wherever you can see people together in big numbers. So we need to be careful and make sure you are strict on the measures. So yes, you're right, there are more students going back to school, and what I can say is to double the vigilance in the schools. On our side, we continue to give the message, the guidelines, and we'll go back and test again after 3 weeks to see these new students who are going back to school could have brought infections in the schools or acquire the infection within the schools. So I believe that these students were in the communities and they are going back in schools. This is another community, still the same country. So we don't expect huge trend of infections if what we agreed to do with schools, with Ministry of Education, and with parents, because some of the student will go back to school and go back home the same day. So, I mean, it's a risk that we took, knowing that we may have an increase of cases, but the most important thing is we can balance it. Still have few cases and still have schools open.
Right, that was the case of schools, but generally, what is the view of the COVID-19 pandemic in the country as a whole?
Generally, the situation of COVID-19 in Rwanda is not bad. It doesn't mean COVID is over. You still have cases every day, reported cases. At some point, we saw a drop of infections, but after, as of recent, we've seen clusters of infections in some prisons and also in some refugee camps. It does explain people living together, and if one infected could infect others. So we've seen it in the markets in August here in Kigali. So the thing is keeping proper measures, even in communal places where people are condensed and living together, you can stop the transmission, but again, in the general population, that is where things needs to be careful and make sure, if even in small gatherings, in small parties that should not be taking place, people tend to relax a bit, remove masks, believing that if you are with a friend of a friend in a household, in a family, you are immune to COVID. That is wrong. Some countries are reporting increase of cases because of household parties. Here in Rwanda, we know some people are still having parties without protection. We know that there are also places where hotels and bars and actually bars and that are not allowed to open, but the police has been always finding and showing that there are people who are having illegal bars or bars that should not be open. They open the bars in the name of restaurants. Those are the few cases that continue to contribute to infections for us, and yet we are on good track. So the hope is that people really continue to abide to the measures of wearing masks, social distance, washing hands. It's like a song we need to repeat all the time, but this is the only tool we have that can take us from March until next couple of months, where we'll have vaccine probably very soon. So we should not relax now. Let's relax when we have vaccine and when we had protected those who are vulnerable, those who are with non-communicable diseases, those people who could die from this virus. Once we vaccinate them, then probably we will see how measures can be relaxed. But now it's not time to relax.